Alaska here, and I welcome the Minister and his officials to the House, and indeed the opportunity to debate this very important issue regarding fire safety in buildings. And as the Minister said, I think any priority with any building, the first is the safety of the people and the residents and the inhabitants of that building. Second priority then is the building and the material itself, and then obviously the belongings. And at the outset, I do want to remind the House, and indeed my Fianna Fáil colleague, that most of these legacy issues in relation to building problems were as a result of poor compliance during the Celtic Tiger years, 2000 to 2009. And we would ask the question who was in charge during those years, and it was Fianna Fáil. We were left with legacy issues of thousands of unfinished estates, non-compliant buildings and apartment blocks, fire safety traps like Priory Hall that was mentioned. And since then, and indeed I was involved myself as Minister of State in the establishment of a lot of the building control and compliance reform programme within government from 2014 up to 2016, where the BCAR system, the building control and management system, and all of those systems were put in place to ensure compliance and better standards in regards to new buildings. We are aware of very high-profile cases like Priory Hall and others, and I suspect, Minister, there are many more legacy issues where deficient standards were found and can be found during those years. You mentioned yourself, Minister, the tragedy of June 2017, the Greenfell Towers fire that happened, and where so many lives were lost. And it's only when tragedy and a crisis like that occurs that the real public focus is on that. But of course, we know in this House we have an ongoing responsibility, and indeed building control, building management has to be ongoing. It has to be evaluating all of the time how successful the building control standards are and where changes need to be made. Because we obviously know we cannot afford for such a tragedy to occur in this country. One life lost is one too many. Enforcing building control and standards and fire safety compliance obviously is the responsibility of the local authorities, and it is critical that they are adequately resourced in this respect. And I do know, Minister, that new systems and new building control and building management systems are now operated by our local authorities, and I think we need to constantly keep those under review and ensure that our fire inspection departments and building control departments are adequately resourced. As I said, during the boom years we were left with a lot of these legacy issues, but much progress has been made in recent years in relation to dealing with them. But I do note a recent statement by a property management company in the Irish Times, Keenan Property Management, who manage a portfolio of over 20,000 apartments around the country. They themselves carried out a survey of their stock, and they found that, which is a very concerning issue, that in over 70% of their stock there were fire safety issues, now of a various standard. Issues like inadequate fire alarms, outdated fire alarm systems, deficient fire stopping, lack of compartmentation for the escape of fire and smoke within those buildings, and lack of fire detection technology in car parks under apartment buildings. And also they found that there was issues with compliance on planning conditions in relation to fire safety. So all of those issues obviously are a matter of deep concern. And if they're occurring in that portfolio of property, they're obviously occurring in other portfolios as well. So it is important that all apartment stock in this country is surveyed in relation to fire safety, and that where issues arise, that they are remediated. And then we come to the issues of liability. And it is quite obvious that, you mentioned it again yourself, Minister, that the designers, the builders, and indeed the professionals, the engineers who sign off on buildings, because as we all know, fire certification is required before buildings are inhabited now, and indeed the owners are liable and are responsible to ensure that their buildings are compliant. The state involvement, as the Minister has outlined, is in relation to ensuring compliance and standards are upheld, and I think that is important. But, you know, again, in my former role as Minister of State, I was involved in the review of the mica issue in Donegal and Mayo. And I do want to draw, there is a difference between fire safety issues, in my view, in apartment blocks that were built and signed off on by professionals, and issues like mica, where there has been deficient material that may not have been, people may not have been aware of it at the time of construction, but it subsequently developed in later years in the construction and caused huge problems and stress for people. And that is why the government responded to the pyrite issue and the mica issue, and I think rightly so, where people were left in the lurch, where the buildings were literally falling down around them, and the government did respond to assist them. But in this case, where fire safety compliance is not upheld, I believe that the liability should rest indeed with the builders, owners and the professionals who initially signed off on them. After all, they have insurance, I presume, that covers where they're negligent in any way, and I don't think it's fair to expect the state and the taxpayer to be held liable for all incidents of poor workmanship and legacy issues like I have outlined. But having said all of that, I think, Minister, it is important that standards are upheld, and it is important that surveys are continuously evaluated, where people can show that maybe they haven't the financial wherewithal to survey an apartment block they are responsible for. Well, then maybe we should look at some initiatives like a low-interest loan scheme to assist them, if possible. I'm not saying that should be done or can be done. I think there should be strict criteria around such a scheme. But where there are genuine fire safety issues and where finance is a problem for the owners or the management companies or whoever might be responsible for that building, I think it is possibly, it would be a good thing to look at some kind of a scheme that the owners could apply to under strict criteria to apply for funding to at least have the fire safety issues addressed. That's something we probably should consider, and I would ask you to do so. I'll say no further. I look forward to further contributions. Thank you,